Now, I might give another example or two, but I thought to wrap this up, I'd like to maybe start in a completely different direction and then come back to all of the major points that they hit. So first of all, animals are very adaptable, and so that was a wonderful point that Dr. Merriam made. I'd like to just add to that a different nuance. Animals can adapt, but as I'm going to explain, one of the ways that animals adapt to an area is that under certain occasions they die and become extinct and a new group replaces them. And I say that because 12,000 years ago, and if you had a chance to come to the archaeology day here a couple of weeks ago, it was wonderful if you didn't, something I didn't know. Down a little south of Goshen, there's a mountain, Lookout Mountain, where there's a cave. I didn't know that. And the cave has some of the oldest evidence of human habitation in the Americas. 12,000 years ago, there were people living in Orange County at this cave. Now, at the time, they were on the mountain, because on the other side of the mountain was this big lake, not there anymore, because the glaciers were melting. Glaciers aren't there anymore. So 12,000 years ago, Orange County, much of it was covered by this sheet of ice, a third of a mile straight up. Right? So in some places of Orange County, if you were standing on the ground, you were a third of a mile straight up because there was a solid block of ice that went from here straight to the North Pole. That's a whole lot of ice, but it was melting. The climate was changing. As it melted, there were all of these animals moving through Orange County, like mastodons, like caribou, like flat-headed peccary. There were fish like lake sturgeon. And the people who were in the cave at Lookout Mountain were hunting them. That's how they fed, their bands. All right. Well, things have adapted. There's lots of, animals, which were alive 12,000 years ago that are alive now. Mastodons aren't. Right? Flat-headed peccaries aren't. Caribou are here, but they've moved. They're now farther north. Lake sturgeon don't live in our area. They live farther north. So I gave two examples where they moved, as Dr. Merriam said, they would. But then two other groups, they became extinct. And so, as Dr. Z had pointed out, and as Dr. Merriam just pointed out, a lot of animals, they're adapted to specific requirements. I mean, there's some parts of the world which are warmer, colder. And if you're going to heat, the planet, or heat an area, then they start to move. All right, so maybe there's an upward migration in latitude, or on a mountain slope. So the lake sturgeon, which used to live in Orange County 12,000 years ago, can now only be found farther north. Same with caribou. There are problems. You can only go so far north. You can only go so far up the mountain, etc. As things heat up, etc. So all of these points have been made. Disease. I'd like to come back to them. But I'd like to begin something completely different, if it's okay with you before coming back. Now, what I'm about to say is not in the vein of, the sky is falling, the world is ending. Just to repeat an important point, in science, you are asked to believe nothing. Please do not believe a single word that I say, or any scientist or any teacher. You doubt, you question, that's your job. All right, and as Dr. Merriam was pointing out, as Dr. Z did last time, here's the evidence. Here's the publication. You go look it up. Here's the data. Here, people need to study this more. We tried to do that. This is what we've observed. All right, but then there are times where you say, all right, here I am on the train tracks. I see a train coming. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. All right, I'm going to make some measurements, but I do have, cause for concern. And let me go through some of the reasons which make me concerned. All right, now, if you were to go to my YouTube channel, all of this could be explained. All right, there are a couple other accents which are, being used by prehistoric amphibians, but we need not go into that today. 250 million, 350 million years ago, we'll start at this one. 350 million years ago, Orange County was at the bottom of the ocean. All right, and if you go to Port Jervis, you can find fossils of marine animals here. This was the bottom of the ocean. You can prove it for yourself by finding these fossils. But then Africa hit us. Or we hit Africa. I wasn't there. I'm not quite sure how small it was. But in any case, all right, there was this collision, and the Appalachian Mountains, including Adirondacks, Catskills, Kittatinny Ridge, that was formed here. And this was a massive time of extinction. The Endeavonia extinctions, which began here, well, this was huge. One of the worst. The biggest 5 mass extinctions of the past 500 million years. All right. If we were to jump ahead a little further in history, that coming together of the supercontinent, the forming of these mountains, that was ending by the Permian. And the Permian, all right, this is where it's bad. 90% of life died out at the end of the Permian period 250 million years ago, the worst time to be alive in the history of the world. The formation of this supercontinent and the movement of the continents, that certainly had something to do with it. But then there was another factor, all right, and this is one of the things I'm trying to build on. Very often when bad things happen, it's not just one cause. It's a couple of them, and it's the cumulated effect. 250 million years ago, not only were the continents finishing their fusing, but there were volcanic eruptions in Siberia, the worst in history. We think that 1 to 4 million cubic kilometers of lava were released, which covered 2 million square kilometers. Now, they went on for about 1 million years. This was not an instantaneous thing. The problem is, when that much volcanic activity spews, there's sulfur, this would cause acid rain, all of these things, but also a lot of carbon dioxide, which would have affected the temperature of the planet, the acidity level of the oceans. All right, now, temperature is a problem as it goes up, but acidity, I want to end with coral reefs. That's a problem because coral reefs, it turns out, are the foundation of many of the marine ecosystems. There's so much more diversity where there are the coral reefs. But as the ocean warms, as the ocean becomes more acidic, you get to a point where they can't survive. And I'm not exaggerating in that. Prior to this extinction, we have old corals, Paleozoic corals, the tabulate corals, the rugose corals. They become extinct. All right? And it's only after this, when the dinosaurs appear, that the kind of corals we have today, the scleractinian corals, that they first appear. So in other words, the corals which had been around for hundreds of millions of years, this ended them, the entire, not species, the group is gone. And there's a while where we can't find fossils of any corals. So something happened here that made it really hard for corals to live. Corals are so important for marine life that a lot of marine life, dies. 90% of life dies out at one point. Carbon dioxide and temperature are probably a factor, although there were arguably others. And then the acidity of the ocean, a factor. All right, well, life rebounds. Once again, some things adapted, but a lot of things just died and were replaced. So in the aftermath of this, dinosaurs appear, mammals appear, turtles appear. All right, lots of things appear only once this extinction is over. All right, so we're in the Triassic. Brave new age. All right, so now we're in the green Mesozoic. All right, if you're looking at a geologic timescale, the Devonian, when Africa hits us, when we hit Africa, that occurs here, mass extinction. The end of the Permian, that's the worst mass extinction we hear of. But then, life goes on really well until. All right, well, you might have guessed this was coming. Even though 250 million years ago, Africa was a 2-hour drive that way, we know that had to change, right? It's not there now. So at some point, this supercontinent broke. And Orange County was right at ground zero, all right? This is where it broke, along the east coast of the United States. And this would have been a huge area of volcanic eruption. Maybe not the greatest volcanic eruption in Earth's history in terms of volume of lava, but certainly in terms of area, the Atlantic Ocean formed. All right? In the Triassic, there was no Atlantic Ocean. By the end of the Triassic, there's an Atlantic Ocean. All right? Once again, this would have affected lots of things, but all of that volcanic activity also would have affected carbon dioxide in the air, which that plus sulfur, etc., would have affected acid rain and pH of the ocean. All right, we have one more before modern, relatively modern times. We get to dinosaurs. They die. Now, one of the big things is a huge rock comes out of the sky, hits where Mexico and Guatemala meet. But then also there's India. Now, I hate to point fingers, but what was India thinking? All right, India had been part of the southern continents for the longest time. It was attached to Africa and Madagascar forever until it broke off, and it's floating, and the rate at which it's floating, that's about as fast as continents move. I mean, it was flying, all right? And in the age of mammals, it's going to slam into Asia, where they come together, that forces up the Himalayan mountains. There used to be all these primitive whales that lived in this area, when the age of mammals begins. But obviously, if you're going to move the subcontinent at this speed, there's consequences, and the consequences are the second worst volcanic eruptions that we know of. So the first worst, that occurred in Siberia during the end Permian extinction, go along with the worst the worst extinction in Earth's history. These are the second worst, the Deccan traps occurring in India. This is going along with what is tied for the second worst extinction in Earth's history. Now, the rock that falls out of the sky, don't get me wrong, that certainly had an impact. But at this moment in history, there was a bunch of bad things happening. The rock is one, but the Deccan traps in India, that is a second. And if for hundreds of thousands of years you're spewing all this carbon dioxide, it changes Earth's temperature, it changes the pH, etc. All right. So we jump to the modern day. All right, and so just mentioning in passing that climate change certainly happens. All right, and we know this because we are living in an area that was once covered by this, area of ice a third of a mile thick. The first inhabitants of our area, they were living at the end of glaciers near rivers that don't exist anymore, as mastodons were, traveling along this. So we know the climate has changed. We just have to look outside Orange County and see that. Climate change affects so many things like corals. All right, now, corals, as I build these up, they're really important. One is, a lot of islands are made, oh, I'm sorry, we'll get to that. A lot of islands, like the Keys, they're made of corals. See, when climate changed, all right, this area didn't used to have trees on it. This was the bottom of the ocean. Sea level was higher, so sea level goes up, it goes down. When it was up, this was the bottom of the ocean. Corals lived here, all right? And now, the Keys are where old coral reefs were. If you go to the Keys, southern Florida, you get a shovel, you go down and you say, oh, I'll hit nice black dirt. No, you don't. You hit white rock. It's limestone. It's the remains of old coral. So obviously, a lot of our islands are formed by old coral reefs. Corals protect areas from storms. All right, and so if a hurricane is coming, if you have coral reefs, it will break the wave energy, and that certainly helps protect. Then plus, look at this. I mean, this is just wonderful. I love coral so much. Let's just hit the lights for some of these. Corals are wonderful. People come to see these. If you live in the Virgin Islands, all right, you know that so much of your island's economy is tied to tourism. I mean, people love your island, but they love the fishing there. They love the coral reefs that they can scuba dive. So, coral reefs have such great value for humans. Coral reefs have such great value for marine life. 1 in 4 fish in the ocean will spend at least part of its life in a coral reef. Now, you're thinking, oh, that's great because coral reefs are everywhere, right? Honestly, no. There aren't that many of them. If you took all of the world's coral reefs, they would occupy an area of New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, and that's it. So once again, 1/4 of the ocean's fish depend on an area the size of New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Right? These are the most diverse areas in as far as marine life. So marine life really depends on this. And we humans, we depend on marine life. I mentioned, I'll explain why that slide's there in a second. I mentioned, for tourism, etc., and for fishing. But in a lot of parts of the world, the protein that you get from fish is vital. Right? This is a little foreign to our experience, but 1 in 7 people alive today lives on less than $1 a day. 2 in 7 people live on less than $2 a day. If you live near a coast, which a huge percentage of humanity does, the protein that you get from fish, all right, that's huge as far as keeping you healthy. All right, and so we depend on these coral reefs. Now, if you go to a land habitat and you cut down all the trees, look at the life which you see here. I mean, there's nothing here. Now, this is Paraguay. When this was subtropical forest, oh, imagine how much life was living here. And in the same way, if you went to the open ocean, all right, the open ocean doesn't have a whole lot of life. I mean, you don't see that much fish if you're just going along the ocean floor. It's the coral reefs where you get, that great density of it. Right? And there's a problem. So this was, last time I was in the Virgin Islands. Look at this. I mean, the number of fish that you can have, you know, at a coral reef, you know, it's wonderful. It's amazing. So these are the rainforests of the ocean. All right, and you can see all the great diverse corals there. But worldwide, some places more than others, we see something different. We see bleached coral. Right? So that used to be healthy living coral, but now it's bleached. What does bleach mean? Well, technically, we'll make a very long biology lesson in 30 seconds or so. If you were to look inside a coral animal, and corals are animals, but nevertheless they have algae living inside them. That's what lets them do photosynthesis. So they're animals which do photosynthesis. These algae called dinoflagellates, they live here. But when the coral is stressed, they lose these. And so thus that changes their color. These pigmented algae are now gone, so this bleaches the coral. Corals can recover from that, all right, but very often they don't, all right? And so the question is, once they bleach, do they come back, or is now the coral just dead? Look at this coral reef compared to, say, I'll just go back to the other one for comparison. Look at this one, all right? So when you look at the diversity of marine life that you can find in a healthy coral reef, and then you go to a bleached coral reef, obviously it is just a fraction of this. So we care about corals, but once again, this is the foundation of a lot of marine ecosystems. If a quarter of all fish in the ocean are going to spend part of their life in a coral reef, if the coral reefs are dying, that's a problem, right? It's a problem for marine life, and obviously we depend on marine life for food, for tourism, for oh so many things. Why might corals be dying? And here's the other problem. There's a song. You can listen to the song. Horrible accent. My daughter's ukulele playing. Excellent. My guitar playing. But if you look at all of... Actually, there is a song. We'll go through just the straight version. If you look at all of the things which we do to threaten corals, it turns out corals like colder water. So as the climate changes and the oceans warm, that's a problem. So warmer waters, all right, so that is going to decrease the amount of corals which can survive. Why? All right, well, corals, they're animals that make a little hard house for themselves. All right, and then so that's, all right, and so this little cup is what will then, compose the coral reef. Well, the warmer the water, it's harder to do that. The chemical reactions that you need, this gets harder. They have more diseases. Now, Dr. Z had mentioned that as the climate warms, trees were exposed to more diseases like, beetles which are plaguing the evergreens of the West, which kills them and then adds to wildfire. These corals, they are susceptible to more diseases. The main one in the Caribbean is white band disease. Warmer waters have less oxygen. Warmer waters don't circulate nutrients from the bottom the way that colder waters do, so that affects that. And if you increase by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius for say 5 to 10 weeks, that can cause a coral to bleach. 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, that's not a big jump. And I say that on the day that Dallas, Texas is over 90 degrees in November for the first time in recorded history. For the first time in recorded history, southern Texas has temperatures of 90 degrees in November, right? And if warmer temperatures, just warm a little and stay that way, corals bleach and can die. Right? Now, that's bad. But as Dr. Merriman was mentioning, that's just the beginning, all right? Because carbon dioxide dissolves and forms carbonic acid. All right, so if you blow bubbles in water, the water becomes more acidic. The carbon dioxide from your exhale air becomes carbonic acid. So as we put more carbon dioxide in the air, the oceans become more acidic. And this affects corals. It affects their photosynthesis, their respiration, their nitrogen fixation, it affects their larval development. It affects a whole bunch of things. So climate change is affecting corals, and not only because of temperature, all right, but because of other of the acidification. Plus, if the sea level goes up, which it is, here are animals which perform photosynthesis using sunlight, and now you've just moved them farther from the sunlight. All right, so that's going to affect them. climate change will increase the frequency of severe storms, which will damage corals and take years to come back from. Now, these are the ones which are tied to climate change, all right? But as Dr. Merriam had pointed out, what else is going on? Well, human population, which, because of my age, was half what it is when I was born. When I was born, there were 3.5 billion people on the planet. There are now more than 7. Human population is double what it was when I was born in my lifetime. That's not a big expanse of time to add 3.5 billion people to a planet. From the year 2000 to 2011, your lifetime, 1 billion people were added in 11 years. So we're adding more people. So beyond these effects, what will happen as 1 billion more people need fish for food? All right, well, we'll increase the harvesting of these. And as fish become more and more scarce, then destructive fishing techniques are often used, like using cyanide or using dynamite. As more and more people have houses, that's more and more erosion as they clear land. That's more and more septic systems, which then cause algal blooms, etc. The point is that climate change is bad, but it's occurring with lots of other things as well. All right, as human population grows, and it's our fossil fuel use which is driving this climate change. We not only are producing more and more fossil fuels as we get more and more people, we're now cutting down more trees because we need more land for our houses, more land for our cattle, etc. That's more runoff, that's more pollution. And so these corals, could they adapt? Sure. Maybe to one of these, or 2 of these. But we're giving them 10 of these at the same time, all of them bad. So, corals, that's a problem. But now corals are central for all of the other marine life. Once again, 1 in 4 fish spends at least part of its life in a coral reef. When they go, that's now one huge stress for all of these other fish. So, if we go back onto land for just a second, what's happening to the wildlife of Orange County? All right, well, just to quickly summarize what Dr. Z had pointed out a couple weeks ago and what Dr. Merriam just said. So the temperature is different. Now that might challenge some organisms if they have a narrow band of temperature that they can live in. But that then changes plants, because plants have narrow temperature ranges. So now maybe plants are different in Orange County. Maybe not at first, all right, but some are more stressed, more likely to have diseases. That's going to affect what animals can eat. All right, so there's that stress. This will affect water and storms. So there are areas which are getting more water, more rain than they used to. Areas which are getting more drought, and that's having more forest fires than they used to. So beyond temperatures, that's going to affect organisms. That then affects insects. All right, so here's the point you had raised the other day. If it doesn't get as cold as in winter, now insects which used to live south of us, they can come north. Dengue fever is something the southeast of the United States will have to worry about. All right, so it's something living in our area. Now all of these insects, which never were problems as far as being parasites, etc., they're moving farther north. Or maybe come spring, there's more of them because not as many died in the cold winter weather. So now maybe there's more diseases. Maybe as organisms move, now there's a new predator in the area. There's new parasites. So once again, can animals adapt? Sure they can. All right, up to a point. But if you change too many things at once, if you're changing your predators and your prey and your parasites and the rainfall and the temperature and the acidity of the water, around you, all right, plus you need more and more people, which need, more forests for homes, which are producing more pollution. There's more salt from roads, in winter. That's just stress after stress after stress. Will some survive? Sure they will. All right, because 12,000 years ago, there was 1/3 of a mile of ice in this area. Did some animals survive it? Yes. But where are the mastodons? They're not here anymore. Where are the flat-headed peccaries? They're not here anymore. All right, the caribou and the lake, sturgeon, they still live, on Earth, but nowhere near Orange County. They've moved farther north. All right, and so some things will adapt. But the Shenandoah salamander is a species of salamander. It lives on one mountain in Virginia and nowhere else in the world. All right, so there's lots of animals which have big ranges. Lots of animals have just tiny, tiny ranges. The only place you can find them on Earth is here. Right? There's a bunch of things that only live in Puerto Rico and nowhere else. And so if you make severe storms more common, and you have a Category 5 hit Puerto Rico directly, what happens to the golden toad? What happens to the Puerto Rican parrot? They were in danger, and Puerto Rico was the only place where you can find them. Well, now you can have species loss.